August 30th, 1945. The skies over Japan were no longer filled with thunder. The air once alive with the howl of bombers and the trembling heartbeat of sirens had fallen eerily silent. From the burned remains of Tokyo to the rice fields of Kyushu, the war that had devoured an empire was finally over. But on that warm morning, when distant engines began to hum again over shattered villages, people looked up in terror. Mothers clutched their children. Old men froze in the streets, and the same dreadful sound that had once meant death rolled closer from beyond the clouds. Yet what descended from the sky that day was not fire, it was mercy. U.S. Army Air Force's Operations Log, OG 1945. From the bombed-out hospitals of Osaka to the coastal towns of Shizuoka, Japan was on the brink of collapse. Its railways were twisted, bridges mangled, and cities, once glowing with life, reduced to skeletal ruins. The people were starving. Epidemics of dysentery and typhus crept through refugee shelters. Doctors, short on supplies, worked with rags for bandages and boiled river water for antiseptic. Children scavenged for anything edible from the ashes of markets that had not traded in months. The empire that had dreamed of dominion now struggled to feed its own. Japanese Home Ministry Report, Sept. 1945. At dawn, the first aircraft appeared, vast silver shapes cutting through a clear blue sky. They came not from the east, where Japan had long feared American bombers, but from the south, from Okinawa. To those who had lived through years of air raids, they looked like B-29s, the same superfortresses that had burned Tokyo to cinders. But instead of the whistling scream of bombs, the sound that followed was the soft flutter of parachutes. White canopies bloomed above the city, carrying wooden crates that thudded into streets, schoolyards, and fields. On each box, a symbol unfamiliar yet unforgettable, a red cross painted over the flag of the United States. U.S. Army Signal Corps Photo Archive 1945. The people hesitated at first. Rumors swept through the crowd. Tricks, delayed explosions, hidden weapons. But hunger and desperation overcame fear. A young nurse in Yokohama named Yuko Sato was among the first to approach. Her hospital had run out of quinine days before. Malaria had taken 3 patients that morning alone. She cut open a crate with a rusted bayonet and froze. Inside, tightly packed rows of glass bottles gleamed in the sunlight. Sulfur drugs, penicillin, medical bandages sealed in wax. Her hands trembled as she lifted the first vial, its label in English, its contents a miracle. Nurse Diary, Yokohama General Hospital, Sept. 1945, dramatized composite. This operation had no official name when it began. Within the U.S. Army Air Forces, it was merely classified as a humanitarian follow-up to Japan's surrender. But among pilots and ground crews, it was known as peace flights. For months these men had trained to destroy. Now, for the first time, they were flying to save. Pilots who had dropped firebombs over Nagoya were now dropping food, medicine, and vaccines. Mechanics at Kadena Airfield replaced bomb racks with cargo nets. Crew chiefs stripped out ammunition belts and filled the space with boxes of serum and condensed milk. U.S. Far East Air Force's Logistics Memo, OG 1945. The irony was not lost on anyone. Many of the same engineers who had perfected the incendiary cluster bomb now worked overtime to design wooden pallets that would survive low-altitude drops without shattering. Boeing technicians repurposed B-29 bomb bays to carry delicate medical supplies, fitting them with spring-release chutes instead of explosive triggers. In the same hangars where destruction had been built, compassion now took shape. Boeing Field Engineering Bulletin 1945. Down below, the Japanese response shifted from confusion to disbelief. In Hiroshima, where death had fallen from the sky only weeks earlier, survivors wept openly as American aircraft circled overhead dropping bundles marked, "Medical aid, property of United States government." One witness later recalled that people stood in the open without cover for the first time, watching the parachutes descend in silence. Hiroshima Prefectural Relief Office Testimony 1946. Every drop zone became a scene of both chaos and grace. Children chased after fluttering parachutes, cheering as the boxes hit the ground. Doctors lifted their eyes to the sky as if in prayer. Farmers abandoned their plows and ran toward landing sites, carrying carts to haul whatever could be saved from the impact. For many, it was the first act of kindness they had seen from an American in their lifetime. Kyoto Citizen Memoir Collection, Volume 2, 1947. At the center of this effort was the U.S. Army's 20th Air Force, under General Curtis LeMay, the same man who had once orchestrated the strategic bombing of Japan. Though infamous for his ruthless efficiency, LeMay approved the humanitarian operation without hesitation. "If we can kill by the thousands," one officer recalled him saying, "then we can save by the thousands too." U.S. Army Air Force's Oral History Project, 1952 dramatized composite. In a way, the mission was also a test, a measure of how a nation shattered by war would react when shown mercy. American military intelligence monitored reactions closely. Field observers reported that Japanese civilians often saluted the aircraft as they passed. Some even placed handmade signs on rooftops painted in English, "Thank you." In a Tokyo schoolyard, children released white doves as a formation of B-29s rumbled overhead, their bellies shining like silver against the morning sun. Allied Translator and Interpreter Section, Field Report No. 58, 1945. Still, not everyone welcomed the gesture. Hardline members of the Japanese military viewed the drops as humiliation, a reminder of defeat. Some officers attempted to confiscate the supplies, claiming they were propaganda, but ordinary citizens resisted. In the fishing village of Kushimoto, when a gendarme tried to seize crates from an American drop, women surrounded him, shouting, "These are for our children!" The officer backed away. That same night, villagers boiled American milk powder and shared it among the sick. Local testimony, Wakayama Prefecture Archive, 1946. As word spread, the sky itself seemed to change meaning. In a matter of days, the image of the American bomber shifted in the minds of millions, from an angel of fire to an angel of life. Across Honshu and Kyushu, people began keeping daily watch on rooftops, hoping to glimpse the next wave of planes. Hospitals erected makeshift landing zones for C-47 transports, carrying doctors and Red Cross personnel. For many, these flights were the first visible sign that the war had truly ended. U.S. Red Cross Mission Brief, Oct. 1945. But behind the scenes, the mission was also an experiment in logistics and trust. Could the same machinery of war, designed for annihilation, be converted overnight into an instrument of mercy? American planners faced their own doubts. The tropical heat of the Japanese summer threatened to spoil penicillin before it reached patients. Parachutes failed, crates shattered, and in some regions miscommunication led to supplies being dropped miles off target. Yet every failure brought rapid adaptation. Engineers installed insulated compartments, tested low-altitude airflows, and even coordinated with Japanese meteorologists who had once helped target American planes for interception. U.S. Army Quartermaster Technical Report, Sept. 1945. The most striking image came days later, captured by a combat cameraman over Yokosuka, a long column of Japanese civilians, doctors, nurses and children walking through the ruins, carrying white boxes with red crosses through smoke and sunlight. The caption beneath the photo read simply, "Supplies from former enemies, U.S. Signal Corps Archive, photo number 453178. By the first week of September, more than 4,000 tons of food and medical supplies had been delivered across Japan. Death rates from infection began to drop. Hospitals reopened. The Japanese press, under Allied supervision, printed cautious headlines about unexpected aid from the skies. And as a new kind of silence settled over the islands, a silence without fear, the people began to wonder, if mercy could fall from the same sky that once brought death, what else might follow? In the weeks that followed Japan's surrender, the skies over the islands became a web of flight paths, thousands of miles traced by men who had once been masters of destruction. Behind this sudden humanitarian effort lay a labyrinth of planning, secrecy, and engineering brilliance. What Japanese civilians saw as simple mercy was in fact the product of one of the most complex logistical transformations in modern military history. U.S. Army Air Force's Logistics Division Memo, Sept. 1945. At the heart of it was the U.S. Far East Air Forces, headquartered in Manila. In late August, General Douglas MacArthur's staff issued a confidential directive to convert selected bombing units into emergency airlift squadrons. Their new mission: stabilize Japan's civilian population before chaos could erupt. The fear wasn't just humanitarian, it was strategic. U.S. analysts warned that famine or epidemic could collapse Japan's surrender into disorder, jeopardizing occupation and peace. Starvation is an enemy as real as any remaining soldier, one internal memo declared. GHQ Scappi Civil Affairs Report, Sept. 1945. To achieve this, the Americans turned their most fearsome tool of destruction, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, into a lifeline. The conversion process began at Kadena Airfield on Okinawa, where teams of mechanics, engineers, and Red Cross officers swarmed over rows of bombers. The B-29's bomb bays, designed to carry 20,000 pounds of explosives, were refitted with wooden pallets and suspension cradles padded with felt to protect fragile glass vials. Gun turrets were sealed. Ammunition was replaced by penicillin, sulfur powder, and powdered milk. Each aircraft carried nearly 5 tons of medical supplies, carefully loaded to maintain balance and minimize stress on the airframe. Technical Manual TM 1-15-FU 1945. It was a task that demanded ingenuity. The delicate vials of penicillin, a miracle drug still scarce even in the United States, had to survive turbulence and temperature swings at 10,000 feet. Engineers from Wright Field worked overnight to design insulated canisters filled with crushed dry ice. Each container could keep the drug below 50 degrees Celsius for up to 8 hours, long enough to reach mainland Japan. "We turned bombers into refrigerators," one technician joked. But the stakes were no joke. Each flight carried enough medicine to save thousands. U.S. Army Quartermaster Technical Report, 1945. To drop the crates safely, a new parachute deployment system was improvised. Using data from ballistic tests, ordnance engineers adjusted the release angle and descent velocity so that boxes hit the ground under 15 feet per second. Parachutes were cut from surplus nylon once used for flak jackets. Some were even dyed white to symbolize peace. As the first test drop succeeded near Okinawa, one observer remarked that the same wind that once spread fire over cities now carried hope. Army Air Force's Engineering Division Field Test Record, AUG 1945. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, another effort was unfolding, this time in factories. At the Upjohn Company in Kalamazoo, Michigan, chemists accelerated production of penicillin for overseas shipment. In Brooklyn, carrier engineers built compact refrigeration units to keep blood plasma viable during transport. Ford's Willow Run plant, once producing B-24 Liberators, now manufactured packing crates for medicine. America's wartime industrial miracle had not gone silent. It had merely changed its purpose. War Production Board Bulletin No. 2187, 1945. Within Japan, coordination was equally delicate. American officers had to liaise with Japanese local officials, many of whom were still adjusting to the new reality of surrender. Through interpreters from the Allied translator and interpreter section, radio messages were broadcast on surviving transmitters. "Do not fear aircraft bearing Red Cross markings. Aid is being delivered." Still, mistrust lingered. In Shizuoka, villagers refused to open the first parachute boxes until a local doctor confirmed they contained no explosives. When he found surgical gauze and quinine instead, the crowd erupted in tears. Allied Translator Field Report No. 59, 1945. As the missions expanded, they took on a name, Operation Starvation Relief, unofficially dubbed Peace Flights by the crews. The 509th Composite Group, famed for its role in atomic operations, was quietly reassigned to logistical support. Pilots who had dropped the world's deadliest weapons were now tasked with delivering the world's most precious cargo. "We were trained to end lives," one recalled. "Now we were saving them from the air." 509th Group Debrief, 1946, dramatized composite. Each sortie was a marvel of coordination. Aircraft took off in waves from Okinawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, flying precise corridors at altitudes between 5,000 and 8,000 feet. Crews used modified Norden bomb sites to time their drops over pre-surveyed coordinates, rail stations, hospitals, and coastal towns where crowds could safely gather. Inside the fuselage, crewmen counted down over intercoms, 3 seconds to release. 2, 1, drop. The belly doors opened, and instead of bombs, streams of parachutes poured out into the wind. U.S. Army Air Force's mission log, Sept. 1945. The Japanese press began cautiously reporting on these sky gifts. The Asahi Shimbun printed a story titled "Medicine from the Heavens," describing how villagers waved white cloths in gratitude as the planes passed overhead. Though subject to Allied censorship, these accounts began to change perceptions of Americans. For the first time, the word enemy no longer fit. Asahi Shimbun Reconstruction Issue, Oct. 1945. Behind the headlines, the logistical challenges remained immense. Fuel shortages, mechanical failures, and typhoon weather all threatened the mission's success. One squadron lost 2 aircraft in a violent storm off Kyushu. Both crews bailed out and were rescued by Japanese fishermen, men who only weeks earlier might have viewed them as invaders. Now those same fishermen shared rice and water with the drenched Americans until rescue boats arrived. U.S. Navy Pacific Rescue Log, Sept. 1945. The collaboration extended beyond the skies. Japanese railway workers helped distribute supplies inland, repairing lines with scrap metal and wood. American engineers provided spare tools and instruction manuals. Doctors worked side by side in makeshift field clinics. A photograph from Nagoya shows a Japanese nurse and an American medic administering penicillin to a malnourished child. An image later reprinted across the world as a symbol of reconciliation. U.S. Red Cross Photo Archive, 1946. Technically, the mission was a masterpiece. In less than 2 months, the United States delivered over 15,000 tons of aid to Japan, an operation rivaling the Berlin airlift that would follow 3 years later. Each crate, parachute, and vial bore the fingerprints of thousands, engineers, chemists, factory workers, and logisticians who had learned that mercy required the same precision as war. U.S. Army Quartermaster Statistical Summary, 1945. Still, the most remarkable transformation was psychological. American pilots who once saw Japan only as a target now saw faces, children waving from rooftops, women bowing in thanks, farmers raising their hats to the sky. For many, it was the first time they felt peace in their own hearts since the war began. "When I saw those parachutes open," one navigator wrote, "I realized we were finally flying towards something worth saving." Aircrew Diary. 20th Air Force dramatized composite. And for Japan, the effect rippled far deeper than any single mission. These flights began to dissolve the hatred that years of propaganda had cemented. Teachers used empty parachutes as cloth for new school uniforms. Hospitals preserved the wooden supply crates as relics of survival. In Hiroshima, survivors of the atomic bombing formed a volunteer group to assist in unloading aid shipments. They called themselves Heiwa no Tsubasa, the Wings of Peace. Hiroshima Municipal Record, 1946. But even as compassion spread through the rubble, a new realization dawned among both sides. Mercy could be as powerful a weapon as fire. American strategists studying Japanese morale noted that gratitude toward occupation forces was rising sharply, making resistance almost non-existent. Humanitarian aid had achieved what bombs never could: obedience through hope instead of fear. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Psychological Warfare Division Report, 1946. As the final peace flight departed Okinawa in late October, its engines echoing over a land reborn, a new question lingered in every heart. From the air crews who had flown above the clouds to the children who had watched parachutes bloom like white flowers over their ruined towns. If former enemies could bring life from the sky, could friendship itself be rebuilt from the ashes of war? By the winter of 1945, the hum of American aircraft had become a familiar sound across Japan. What had once been the drone of fear now carried a strange reassurance. Villagers in Nagano timed their fieldwork to the distant rhythm of propellers. Children drew airplanes in the dust, labeling them not as enemy but as medicine birds. For a nation that had lived years under bombardment, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. U.S. Civil Affairs Psychological Survey, 1946. The strategic minds in Washington understood the deeper value of this transformation. Operation Starvation Relief, never formally acknowledged in headlines, had achieved what decades of diplomacy could not. It softened the hearts of a defeated people without firing another shot. MacArthur's staff recognized the psychological leverage it created. "A nation that receives bread and medicine does not resist occupation," one aide wrote. "It cooperates, rebuilds, and remembers." GHQ SCAP Internal Memo, Dec 1945. Across Japan, the humanitarian flights became the foundation of what came to be called soft victory. American civil engineers began restoring railways, bridges and ports, often with Japanese labor under supervision but mutual respect. In Tokyo, the newly formed Public Health and Welfare Ministry was staffed with both Japanese doctors and American medical officers. Together, they launched the largest vaccination campaign in Asia's history against typhus, cholera, and dysentery. Within 6 months, disease mortality rates dropped by 60%. U.S. Army Preventive Medicine Report, March 1946. The economic revival followed swiftly. Medical aid was soon joined by shipments of powdered milk, flour, and agricultural seed. The same logistical pipelines that had once delivered destruction now became arteries of reconstruction. The U.S. Navy's cargo fleet, once dedicated to blockades, was repurposed into floating warehouses. In Yokohama, dock workers, many former soldiers, unloaded American supply crates marked not with the stars of invasion, but with the emblem of the Red Cross. U.S. Navy Supply Command Log, 1946. But beyond logistics and infrastructure lay something more profound: the reshaping of identity. Post-war surveys conducted by the Civil Information and Education section found that 70% of Japanese civilians described the Americans not as conquerors, but as helpers. Propaganda once depicting Westerners as beasts had dissolved under the tangible reality of penicillin and compassion. Even the language of defeat began to shift. School books printed in 1947 referred to the new peace born from mercy. CIE Education Reform Bulletin, 1947. American airmen too were transformed. Many of them stayed on as part of the occupation forces, working as liaisons in hospitals or clinics. Pilots who had once bombed Tokyo now taught Japanese doctors how to use oxygen equipment and refrigeration units. In letters home, they described the experience as atonement through engineering. One wrote to his wife, "I used to measure missions by how many tons we dropped. Now I count by how many lives we deliver." Aircrew Letter Collection, 1946, dramatized composite. The collaboration produced a new generation of innovators. Japanese chemists trained by U.S. medical officers began developing their own antibiotic derivatives, leading to the birth of post-war pharmaceutical companies such as Takeda's Modern Research Division. The rebuilding of medical facilities also created a blueprint for industrial renewal. Factories that had once manufactured bullets now produced surgical instruments. Laboratories rebuilt with Allied funding became Japan's first biotechnology hubs. Economic Rehabilitation Bureau Report, 1948. Politically, the Humanitarian campaign became a cornerstone of America's emerging Cold War strategy. Washington understood that a healthy, stable Japan could serve as a bulwark against Soviet influence in Asia. The peace flights were no longer merely an act of mercy, they were a psychological and ideological weapon. General MacArthur himself wrote, "We conquered Japan by faith in humanity, not by fear. And it is humanity that will hold it." MacArthur Papers, 1947. In the ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this philosophy took root with astonishing resilience. Survivors organized clinics using donated American supplies, forming the early foundations of Japan's universal healthcare model. American doctors like Dr. Howard Rusk, who later pioneered modern rehabilitation medicine, helped establish physical therapy programs for bomb victims. These collaborations seeded decades of medical exchange between the two nations. Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission Field Report, 1947. Yet the legacy wasn't purely institutional, it was emotional. In rural towns, mothers still told stories of the day the white parachutes opened above their villages. They kept fragments of the cloth as good luck charms, or stitched them into wedding kimonos. "It was as if the sky forgave us," one survivor recalled. "When I saw that medicine fall, I believed life could begin again." Hiroshima Oral History Project, 1952 dramatized composite. By 1948, over 60% of Japan's hospitals were operating again, many using surplus American equipment. Civilian morale surged. The symbolism of those early airdrops, the idea that salvation could descend from the same machines that once brought death, became central to Japan's collective rebirth narrative. Students in post-war classrooms were taught that compassion was stronger than conquest, and engineers studied how technology could serve peace instead of war. Japanese Ministry of Education Report, 1948, for the United States, The operation provided lessons that would echo through the next half-century of foreign policy. When Berlin faced blockade in 1948, General Curtis LeMay cited the Japanese relief missions as a model for the Berlin airlift. Later in Korea, Vietnam, and even Iraq, American commanders drew on the principle that humanitarian relief could secure hearts faster than armed patrols. U.S. Air Mobility Command Historical Analysis, 1951. Still, veterans who participated in the peace flights carried a quieter memory. Many never forgot the look of astonishment on the faces of those who once hid in fear. They didn't wave flags, one pilot said. They just stood there watching the sky. Like they couldn't believe mercy was real. Oral testimony. 20th Air Force Archives, dramatized composite. As decades passed, Japan transformed into one of America's closest allies. Its economy flourished, its cities rebuilt into centers of innovation and art. Yet in certain mountain villages, elders still gathered every August to commemorate the day the planes came with hope. Children released paper parachutes into the sky, carrying messages of gratitude. Few of them knew the technical details, the insulated canisters, the recalibrated bomb bays, the fevered nights of engineering, but they understood the meaning. Mercy had wings. Cultural Heritage Record, Nagano Prefecture, 72. Historians now view Operation Starvation Relief as a pivotal moment in modern warfare's moral evolution, the bridge between destruction and diplomacy, vengeance and reconstruction. It showed that the same precision and coordination used to destroy could be redirected to heal. The operation blurred the line between soldier and savior, proving that victory was not only measured in surrender, but in survival. U.S. Strategic Studies Group Analysis, 1980. And so the story of those planes, once designed to erase cities, ends not with conquest, but with compassion. Over the ashes of empire, a new world took shape, one where power was measured not in bombs dropped, but in lives restored. The sound of engines over Japan became the hymn of a new peace. In the words of one Japanese poet, written in 1946, "From burning sky to healing sky, the wind remembers both. It carries not the echo of war, but the whisper of forgiveness, because in the end, when the planes brought medicine instead of bombs, they carried more than relief, they carried redemption. And that redemption would echo for generations, a reminder that even in the darkest aftermath of war, humanity still has the strength to rise." From the clouds.